Hello and welcome to this special edition of The Firm, coming to you this Monday night because there's big breaking news in from RBI. First there was CCI, then there was DCF. This year brought ROE, and now there is nothing. In a landmark change, the RBI no longer prescribes any one valuation method for the entry and exit of foreign investors into India. It permits the use of any internationally accepted pricing methodology. This is very good news for foreign investors and for the India investment story. And for more on what this means and how this will impact FDI structures, I'm joined by Abhijit Joshi of AZB and Ashwath of Amarchand. To both of you, a warm welcome. Let's start first by talking about how this marks a landmark shift in RBI's thinking process. We saw the first signs of this, Abhijit, in January this year when they put out the call and put option notification, which was otherwise very adverse because they linked it for unlisted shares to ROE. But when it came to compulsorily convertible debentures or preference shares, they had included the option of using any internationally accepted pricing methodology. So that was the first sign that maybe RBI is looking to shift, its decade-old attitude of prescribing a valuation method. Then we saw a further reference in the RBI governor's monetary policy statement in the months that followed. And now we finally have this new policy here. Big change in the way RBI looks at FDI entry and exit?
Absolutely. Big change, but at the same time, late change. Because prescribing valuations is a difficult task. Even courts have held in schemes of mergers that they are no experts as to how value of shares can be worked out. I think the concept out here was a fair value concept. And what the fair value should be, whether it should be the CCI pricing, whether it should be DCF, was best left to the businesses and people who know valuation. So I think it's a great move. It's a move towards the right direction. It is not for any court or regulator to prescribe what would be fair value. It is for the valuers to prescribe, and that's what the RBI has done. And I think to that extent, it's a good move for rationalizing things going forward on the subject.
Ashwath, on this very table, on this very show, in the past, we have criticized RBI for using a very old-fashioned approach, to foreign investment, especially when the country so desperately needs it. You would say this is a contemporary, new-fashioned approach finally?
I would think so, and I think it's actually probably a move towards current account convertibility, capital account convertibility, and a big one, because for the first time, you've looked at a pricing methodology for foreign investment, both entry and exit, where earlier you had prescriptive norms, as he said, CCI and then DCF.
Right.
This is the first time where they've said, any internationally accepted pricing norm, as long as it's done on an arm's length basis, is acceptable. So it's actually a step away from basically saying parties can, determine their own price.
Okay.
Not necessarily there yet.
Okay, so I just want to explain to viewers exactly what's happened in these notifications today, and I'm putting the simple part up front. You all can add the complex part of it. So when it comes to the entry of foreign investment into the country via the issue of shares to a non-resident or foreign investor, that has to be done at a price which is more than the price arrived at via an internationally acceptable pricing method. Those last four words earlier used to be replaced by DCF and before that CCI. Now you don't have that prescribed method. When it comes to the transfer of shares to a non-resident by a resident, there is nothing in these notifications that prescribes what format to follow or how this should be done. But the expectation broadly is that RBI will issue a circular that aligns that with these notifications.
It already has, Meena.
It already has.
So effectively,
okay,
I think
I'm
both
a few hours late on this already.
Floor for investment for foreigners, as well as the cap for exit by foreigners, has effectively been fixed per
No, what
the
I mean
new
is the transfer of shares to non-resident at the point of entry. Is that clear?
That is.
That is also clear?
See, they have said that on the transfer section, while they've amended Schedule 1, they have said that in the body of the regulation, they've said that it will be as prescribed by RBI from time to time.
Right.
But, we are talking about something which is 2, 3, 4 hours old. And therefore, if there is any issue in terms of drafting anomalies that have remained, I think that will be sorted out. The message is loud and clear.
So you fully expect that even in the entry of foreign investment via the transfer of shares from a resident to a non-resident, the same methodology will apply, which is at a price, which is more than a price determined by internationally accepted pricing.
I'm quite certain about it because they've done that in ROE, or rather the optionality, they've done it for issuance. There also could be an interpretation that this is done for transfer, but that's the thought process.
Okay, fine. So when it comes to the exit now of foreign investors, which involves the transfer of shares from a non-resident or a foreign investor to a resident, that has to be done, as you put, at a price less than the price arrived at via, again, internationally accepted pricing methodology, right? So this is the simplified new regime for the entry and exit of foreign investors. Now, here they've said it has to be done at an arm's length. So the valuation of shares has to be in an arm's length, duly certified by a chartered accountant or a SEBI-registered merchant banker. Do you see any problems there at all? Because some of the experts I was talking to say, well, arm's length could be a grey area, but I wasn't sure whether they were just picking holes.
I mean, the basic objective here is they're saying as long as it's a value that is sort of market related, a transaction in which two unrelated parties would effectively do a transaction, it works. So as long as the valuer can support his valuation on the basis of internationally accepted valuation norms, I don't think there should be a problem at all.
Do you see any problem in this subject?
I don't think so. And also, we have to realize that this valuation is in the context of deciding a floor or a cap. This is not a concept where they want to fix what is the value at which you should transact. It's different than parties are free to transact at so long as
above
they
or below
above or below.
Cap, yeah.
So therefore, I think he's right in the extent that we have to read it in context. That I think so long as it's done by a valuer as prescribed, I think the rest would be implicit.
We also do have now fresh guidance on what the pricing methodology will be for warrants and partly paid shares.
I think that's actually a big one. If you really look at it from a foreign investment structuring standpoint, we've had a lot of grey as far as warrants are concerned. It was under the approval route, and we've had views taken by the government in the past which have been unhelpful. So you've had norms applicable to a listed company, lifted in toto and applied to an unlisted company, and that just simply didn't work because you didn't have a market to determine pricing. So this is a welcome move. It does give clarity that warrants are finally okay. Partly paid up shares, would have been instruments that many investors would have used. They'd welcome that as well. I wouldn't say it detracts from the change because change does bring in clarity now. But I think the one sort of provision which one would have hoped wasn't the case was, apart from saying 25% needs to come in for both these instruments upfront, for warrants, the conversion period is limited to 18 months in line with listed companies. May not do the trick, for example, for venture capital investments, where they typically need longer periods, or even private equity investments.
Right.
And 12 months for partly paid up. There's an exemption for issue sizes in excess of 500 crores. But it's still welcome in that until now, there's either been confusion or prohibition on both these topics.
Okay, so explain this to me. The warrants would be converted again at any price that is acceptable as per international pricing methodology. Or is that the effective part in this? Or why is this so important? He said that these are important ways of structuring FDI.
So what he said and what you are saying are two different things. One, what he is saying is that it has to convert in 18 months. And therefore, this is what is prescribed in listed companies.
Right.
In effect, it is
that's the
prescribed
FIPB policy for listed companies as
yeah,
well,
but
right?
it's prescribed
so
now to an unlisted company as well.
So I get that. So I get the duration issue that he's raised. But that's standard FIPB policy that applies to listed companies as well. 25% and 18
but listed and unlisted are two different animals.
I get that distinction. Yeah.
The second point what you are asking is that as to the valuation, I think the circular states that it should not be lower than the value that was arrived at the time of issuance of warrants. So the conversion of warrants, when it converts, should not be less than what it would have been had it been converted at the time of issuance.
So that's laid out in black and white?
That's laid out in black and white.
So again, that he offers great clarity and
yeah.
Absolutely. Minka, at one point of time, there was actually a problem where there was an argument being made in the market that the conversion price should meet the valuation methodology at the time of conversion. So a foreigner coming in, right, had no visibility of whether his commercially agreed price would be valid at the time of conversion because the underlying valuation methodology value could change.
Yeah.
That was clarified by the RBI, where they said that, look, the conversion price has to be determined with respect to the floor that applied at the time of subscribing to the convertible instrument.
So give me an illustration.
So effectively, if I have a, say, compulsorily convertible preference share or a warrant for that matter, which gives me a certain number of shares, right, at a particular value. Let's assume that I get one CCPS at 100 rupees, which is convertible into one, equity share, right? Let's assume that at the time of conversion, the value of that company has moved from 100 rupees, right, to 300 rupees. I'm not left with 1/3 of a share in my example. I effectively get one share at the price at which I had originally invested. So I have the benefit of the interim appreciation of the value of the company, which is the logic in why anybody would do a convertible instrument. So I get, there is still a floor, but the floor is applied at the sensible point of time, which is the point at which the investor makes the investment. And I think that theme continues through this set of amendments as well. So, all of this is really progressive.
Yeah. Except he's right, but I think what he alluded to earlier is that they have prescribed 12 months and for partly paid up share and 18
months for warrants.
I think if in the context of what they want to do is that not to issue quasi-debt instruments. So if you took preference shares, if you took debentures, they talk that they have to be compulsorily convertible, but they don't prescribe a period at which, so long as they are within the overall scheme of the law, it could be converted at any time. However, when it comes to these partly paid up and warrants, they prescribed a period. Though I can understand.
So we've created now distinction
I
between,
think,
let's say, preference shares and...
when you are seeing from a listed situation and from a FEMA perspective, I think what they want to say, don't issue an instrument which never converts and you get a benefit of a quasi-debt. It has to be a...
That's why they've put in the same thing that applies to listed companies, which is 12 and 18.
That's the ethos of the underlying principle. Then 18 months or 12 months is neither here and there, so long as they get paid. So I think it's a fantastic move in terms of recognizing it.
But maybe if they had said...
Rest will evolve, I guess, because the principle is same.
I think the only... I'm not here to, I'm not carrying the RBI's brief, but I think there is logic to, what they've done. Because the difference between a CCPS or a CCD is that from an exchange control perspective, the company and the country is in the money from day one. So the entire investment comes in right up front, right? Whereas if you look at a warrant or a partly, the money comes in subsequently, right? They're still willing to give people the benefit of the upfront valuation, provided they bring the entire sum within a 12 or 18 months. There could have been an argument for why it shouldn't have been longer, but there is rationale for why there's a time cap for these instruments as opposed to instruments which are in the money from day one.
Okay, fine.
I guess there is a good point out there, but 12 and 18 probably is too short.
Well, you can't have an RBI set of notifications and not complain about something in here. We're going to take a quick break, gentlemen. When we come back, we'll talk about the controversial issue of options, how these notifications change that, if at all, and what happens to options that were entered into before these notifications or before the January notification. That's when we come back. Welcome to this special edition of The Firm. We're reaching you tonight on Monday night because we've had a set of notifications come in from the Reserve Bank of India that considerably liberalize the pricing mechanisms for the entry and exit of foreign direct investment. This is very good news, and we're trying to examine how this will impact FDI structures in the country. I want to come to the issue of options. What they've said in these notifications today is that the guiding principle will be that the non-resident investor is not guaranteed any assured exit price at the time of making such investment agreements and shall exit at the price prevailing at the time of exit, subject to lock-in period requirement. If you take what they have done with regards to the pricing of entry or exit, and now this language when it comes to call and put options, it cleans up the entire space that was so full of controversy, right? As long as you are not promising assured returns and you are following an internationally accepted pricing methodology as the floor or the cap, you're in good hands. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. Well
That's
articulated.
a huge, huge change.
Absolutely huge.
A huge change because it's a two-step change. It's only this year that we in fact got any validity or the blessings of RBI when it came to call and put options being valid. And now we finally, in 6 months, have a very liberal regime for call and put options.
Yeah, liberal regime, yes. I think in a sense you got to step back, because if you see where there were protectionist measures for the domestic investors. There used to be Press Note 9, before that Press Note 1. And this perhaps is the only piece now remaining in terms between a resident and a non-resident in terms of protections. So that particular piece remains. In that, I think there has been a great movement in terms of RBI saying that basically they will not going to step in the realm of valuations. And that is a uniform principle now throughout, whether it's a simple transfer or whether it's a transfer with optionality. So I think it's a good move. Yeah.
3 cheers, Ashwath? Or is there a big but here?
There isn't a but. I think it's very clearly a move forward, a welcome move. The problem with the earlier change in January, you remember when we discussed it, was effectively the RBI was expecting a foreign investor to come in on the basis of projections, which was DCF,
right,
but get out on the basis of past history.
Which was ROE.
So ROE was extremely prescriptive, and that was raising a lot of concern. This particular flexibility as far as pricing is concerned, I think will go a long way in giving foreign investors comfort that they can effectively come and do deals on the basis of what the commercial agreement is, without the risk of behind the scenes manipulations potentially by their counterparties to thwart commitments that have been made on the basis of even ROE, for example. You could try and trigger options and engineer exercises of options in a particular period when you've had a bad year, etc. That is now, hopefully, with this particular methodology, they've left pricing, as Abhijit put it, to the parties.
Right.
And as long as a valuer, is willing to put his or her name on a valuation, you can do it. There is a safeguard because, if you're going to do it on the basis of a valuation, and tomorrow it is actually established that the valuation was cooked up, there is still that protection the RBI has kept from an exchange control standpoint. They
so
can
now
come back
there is
at it.
nothing stopping you from being able to enter call and put options in a foreign direct investment situation which involves unlisted shares. Nothing whatsoever.
No.
Nothing, right?
Nothing.
Everything has been cleaned up.
Except the price. The price will have to be supported by a valuation.
Yeah, but I mean, so that could be any internationally accepted pricing methodology that you
There's
use,
still one
right?
prohibition that continues, and if you look at it from a policy standpoint, I think a lot can be said in favor of that particular limitation, which is that they still cannot be an assured price exit, which is guaranteed.
Yes, but I think that
is in line with
mindset,
equity,
yeah.
absolutely.
And that mindset has been RBI's position for a long time now, saying we will not allow you to bring in,
So that was, I was
equity,
telling earlier, the question is that...
masquerading it as equity.
Exactly. They want you to take, you are subscribing to equity,
Right.
and you should take equity risks.
Right. And that seems like a fair position, right? No?
No, I think
Let me
I
supply
think
the
it's fair.
but to this conversation, and that is that prospectively you might have now no hurdles left when it comes to the signing of call and put options. But what happens to those options that were already signed? And I can see the both of you looking at each other trying to evade this question. But it's a question that needs to be answered for our viewers. Would you consider that they are not valid because they didn't have the blessings of SEBI and RBI anyways till late last year and early this year? Or what would you apply as the pricing methodology for those? How will this work?
If you looked at it from a foreign investor standpoint, the element of retrospectivity, which is very clearly here because it was mentioned in January and it's not been, in that sense, modified, is a cause for complaint. Because at the end of the day, the foreign investor is going to turn around and say that if you were applying this position from way back, why did it take you so long to clarify it? Abhijit alluded to, this is long overdue. The policy argument against that is any arrangement. Now, if you really look at what they've done, they've said that as long as it's validly valued, so to speak, it's valid, right? The only argument that one can come up with is if I had a fixed price exit some time ago that was put into place, I would argue that, look, this particular change is impacting me. The policy argument against that is, at the end of the day, equity, by its very definition, means unlimited downside and
No, I
upside.
get the policy argument. I'm saying what you're going to do practically now for those clients who have signed call and put options a long time ago and now are wondering at what level value can they exit?
No, I think the answer is as long as they can find a valuer, right, applying internationally accepted valuation norms on an arm's
Sure, they'll
length
be able
basis.
to find a valuer very easily.
That's my point, Minka. It's not as simple as that. I mean,
Why?
at the end of the day, there is liability for both parties as well as the valuer. So I don't think,
What do you mean by
probably,
liability for both parties and the valuer?
for a breach of law. If at the end of the day it is established that, it was not
The valuer is
internationally...
applying a method that suits the foreign investor to exit at what doesn't look like a fixed price but is in fact an assured price.
And that is where the arm's length basis will also come through. And if it's proved that it is not internationally accepted valuation norms on an arm's length basis and instead was, party accepted norms for convenience to facilitate, whatever the business arrangement was, there is going to be liability
But
for
I
breach
suppose
of
RBI will be keeping a close eye on that, won't it?
Yeah, I think there's onus is on also the industry, because when the regulator liberalizes, the industry should comply in letter and
honor,
spirit.
yeah.
RBI has not dismantled the enforcement directorate in terms of, and if they find...
Veiled threat on behalf of RBI.
No, I mean, that's an investigating arm.
Right.
And if it's found that there is, a lot of abuse in this relation, I'm sure they'll look into it.
So in simple English, what you're saying is here on, call and put options can be signed as long as you make sure there are no assured returns. And all those call and put options that were signed earlier, if they were signed on the basis of assured returns, two bad guys, you need to recalculate and go by whatever the current prevailing fair price is based on the, internationally accepted pricing methodology. That's how it will work, right? And don't try and rig it because, like he pointed out, the ED is still alive and
kicking. And he makes a very important point because, at a point in time where we are seeing so much legislating for the exception, right? You have a regulator who's actually taken that leap of faith and said, look, I want to facilitate, commerce and I want to facilitate investment. The last thing that you need is for the market to get smart, to abuse it, and then cause the regulator to regret what they've done and then roll back. So.
Okay, sorry, maybe this is the question I should have asked right on top. What do they mean by internationally accepted pricing methodologies? I mean, in my head, it could be any pricing methodology, whether it's based on return on equity or based on DCF, that pertains or suits that industry, that business, etc. Have I understood that correctly, or?
Yeah, so I think they've used internationally recognized because I think at the end of the day, I think that's a bit of a sophistication, but at the end of the day, we don't have methodologies which are largely different than how they value anywhere else, whether it's a DCF, whether it's a net asset value, whether it's the price earning method, etc. Right. And this realm has been crossed in many of the restructuring matters when courts had to pronounce on it. And there is no really right or wrong method. There could be combination of methods, there could be weightages, and there are evolved industry practices, benchmarks, etc. So in that sense, if you have internationally recognized principles of, let's say, weightages, let's say distribution of what you will put in a particular industry or what kind of methodology you will adopt in a particular industry, if it is more accepted internationally, then probably that is what you should follow. That's what they're saying. Because valuation is such a subjective exercise that A valuer can swing from B valuer and both of them have done a good job.
Yeah, absolutely.
And therefore what they're saying is, for example, if there is a particular method which is more used in, let's say, infrastructure companies because of long gestation project and which is now actually been used all over the world, and a particular weightage is given, then you follow that by and large with your own
As simple as that, or do you think that this in itself could throw up some complication?
I mean, let's look at it purely from a legal perspective. There's a standard that is applied which is internationally accepted. So let's assume you have a valuer who's willing to, tailor a valuation, for you by applying certain principles. The question to ask from a compliance perspective at that point is there authority through market practice and valuation norms and practices in other markets as well, which basically support the the evaluation methodology that Abhijit just mentioned. If you don't have adequate support, it goes into the route of international acceptance. So the valuation methodology, what this seeks to do basically is to ensure that you aren't able to cook up methodologies to suit the convenience of a particular case.
Okay, we're at the end of our time, gentlemen. So I want quick last words from both of you on really why is this so important. We've spent like 22 minutes talking about some fairly technical stuff, saying this is linked to the way foreign investors look at India. Why is this so important, Abhijit?
Because I think, this lends a lot of logic. This lends a lot of common sense, which is not so common. And it rationalizes the regulators' outlook, which is to say, and as Ashwath had alluded earlier, a step towards current account convertibility, capital account convertibility, is to say that you are free to decide among yourself.
So it treats investors like adults. Probably for the first time in a long, long time, doesn't it?
It actually gives them the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
And it basically welcomes them.
Yeah,
and
which
actually
is such a
brings in
contrast to
clarity.
the way we otherwise do laws in the recent past, right? I mean, those laws are based on, look, you could be a crook, so we're going to legislate against that. Instead, here they're saying, look, we trust you to behave like adults, and we hope you won't abuse that trust. No, big change for the way foreign investors will look at India?
Absolutely, because I think so. It's not, I mean, per se, you can view this as an event, but if you see it as a trend as to what is unfolding, I think you will have more policy which is robust, less prescriptive policy, which is all a good sign, I guess.
Yeah.
A clear fillip to
in
foreign
itself,
investment.
Will it be appealing to foreign investors? Yes.
In and of itself, the three measures, which is option pricing, warrants, partly paid up shares, I think are great developments from a foreign investor standpoint. I think it ensures that we are bringing our exchange control regime in line with other markets, where it basically says ultimately let the commercials decide the price at which you enter and exit and basically get an interest in a company. So I think at the end of the day, clearly a pro-investment change on part of the RBI.
All right,
and as Abhijit says, as part of a list of things that they've been doing in the recent past, moving towards that direction, which is also heartening.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us with the first take. It's only been a few hours, so appreciate both of you joining us here with that analysis. We'll be back towards the end of the week with more analysis on this. Thank you for watching this special edition of The Firm.